Hey everyone, it's Natalie Bencavanga, and welcome to a very special edition of Facts Over Fear. You guys, I've been in this game a long time as an independent journalist, and I have to say it's been really interesting to see how this landscape of media has changed so rapidly, in particular, just over the last few years. There was a time when Americans largely agreed on the fact that facts mattered, but today, we're really living in an era where misinformation spreads faster than verified reporting. Trust in the media is at historic lows. Local newsrooms are shrinking and altogether disappearing. And generative AI is transforming how information is created and consumed, with accuracy being optional. And while all of this is going on, we're witnessing crackdowns on journalists and free speech, while legacy media crumbles as the billionaire class buys our news outlets and consolidates them. So, what is rising out of the ashes? Because I promise you, there is a silver lining to everything I just shared. It's the rapid rise of the independent journalist and content creator, and they are rapidly filling the void. But we have to take a deeper look at this. Can independent media build a sustainable future for journalism, or what we think of journalism, in 2026 and beyond? And how do we restore trust in an information ecosystem that's increasingly fragmented, partisan, and polarized? These are some big questions, but don't worry, we're going to answer them all in 20 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
And joining me and joining me today to help me just do that is Liz Kelly Nelson. She is the founder of Project C, which is an initiative helping independent journalists like myself. I got to be a part of it this year, which has been phenomenal, build sustainable businesses and stronger communities in this ever-changing landscape. So we're going to tackle some of these bigger questions that are facing us. How did we get here? Where is this industry heading? And what does it take to rebuild public trust in an age of algorithms, AI, and misinformation? Liz, thank you for a little light girl talk. I'm really excited to have you here.
Well, I'm glad to know that our agenda is that we are solving all of the problems. We are
Yes.
fixing journalism in the next minutes, and
Yes.
for it. Thank you for having me, Natalie.
Absolutely. I mean, who knew it would be that easy, really?
Hey,
It's just,
exactly. Well, I mean,
yeah.
apparently we did, and apparently the creator journalists who we know and work with also knew that because we're out there making it happen every single day.
Absolutely. So before we dive into the topic, Liz, for people that may not know you or your work, can you share a little bit about your passion and connection to this independent media landscape?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been working in journalism for 25 plus years, and most of those years have been working within media companies and traditional legacy media. My last role, my last W-2 job, as I call it, was at Vox Media, where I was the vice president of the Vox news brand. And around 2023, we started seeing like many of our most talented, especially younger journalists leaving, launching their own YouTube channels, Substacks, Beehive newsletters, just going out and kind of making their own way in the information landscape. So I started talking to them and finding out why. Why were they leaving? And there were a handful of reasons. One was they felt like they weren't being properly incentivized at media companies. Like if they were bringing in a lot of traffic, they weren't seeing bonuses or other recognitions for the contributions that they were making. The second is there was the continuing growth of almost a disconnect between the kinds of missional content these journalists wanted to create and what the publishers were asking for. And that is directly tied back to the fact that the journalism industry is struggling. And so it's making a lot of trade-offs that are about how can we make money now versus like what will sustain us in our mission for the long run. And these journalists weren't up for that. But the biggest reason across the board was that these journalists wanted to be working where the audience is. And the audience was no longer with owned and operated media websites. It is really out here in this distributed ecosystem. And so I listened to them and thought, you know what, you're right. I want to be where you are. I want to be helping the future of journalism and news and information. And so I left Vox. I did a fellowship at Columbia University where I studied this new space, creator model journalism. And 3 years ago, it was still very, very fresh. That term didn't even exist. And 3 years later, Project C is a thriving community. We're up to 245 members as of today, all journalists who have left traditional media or in the process of leaving traditional media and working independently. And it's, as you know, Natalie, it's a really great community where people are helping one another every day. And we do a ton of training with folks and we're learning. We're kind of like, it's a trite saying, but we are building this airplane like as we fly it. And the people who are doing this work are a part of determining what this new future looks like.
Well, I have to say, you and your work have really inspired me. I actually just saw Ben Camacho joining us as well. Hi,
Hey,
Ben.
Ben.
He was also part of the Creators C cohort that I was earlier this year. And I have to say, the statement that you said, we're building the plane while we're flying it. I've literally been saying that, Liz, for so many years now. And I got to tell you, to find other people that are also building a much bigger plane is really, really cool. And so I just wanted to say, just as a personal thing, I just so appreciate you and what you've done and what you're trying to do. And, you're really responding to what is happening in the market. And I think it was great that you actually were listening and honing in on some of the issues that people were experiencing, because I do feel as though we are living through one of the most significant transformations in journalism and media in literal decades. From your perspective, and you touched on it a little bit, but where do you see the industry right now?
It is in a continued state of transformation and change, and it has been for the last several years. And I would say that's a few things that have kind of converged. Like one is this massive loss of trust in institutional media. It is the lowest it's ever been. Gallup just came out with new numbers yet again 2 weeks ago, and I think trust in newspapers is at 16% in the United States, lowest it's ever been. Broadcast news is even lower. And so there is a reimagining or a rethinking or a crisis of identity for what the people who are working within those media companies are even doing, right?
Mm.
If you're not reaching audience, what are you doing? I am not a person who thinks that there's an either or a binary that we're going to have, traditional media or it's going to be all creator. I think that we are still finding the equilibrium with what a new normal is. Um, but a part of that has already blossomed and is blossoming in a big way, which is this creator ecosystem, which now journalists are able to find their way through, right? Given some help with the business side that we didn't learn in J school or working in newsrooms. And so I see the journalists, like the reporters, the people who care about doing this work, doing the real steps that need to be done to reinvent themselves for this new world. What we haven't seen yet is the media companies figure out how to reinvent themselves. And I want them to, right? Like,
Mhm.
I want them to figure that out because I think there is a role for larger media companies, but they maybe won't be as large. They need to be more differentiated. They need to figure out what the specific value is that they can deliver. I think the future for a traditional newsroom looks much more like ProPublica than CBS News.
Wow, that's so interesting. And just to
Mm.
add a few other statistics to what you were saying, because that 16% trust in newspapers is astonishing on every level. And I
Yeah.
was just looking at this on Reuters, and it says 54% of people are globally now using social media and video networks weekly for news, including 34% of users are turning to YouTube, followed by 26%. So, to your point, people are still looking for news, right? I think there's this idea, oh, younger people don't want to look for news or they're not interested. Oh, we're interested. They're interested. It's just in different formats and in different mediums. And what you said, I wanted to expand on a little bit about the idea of what's going on with legacy media organizations, how they're shrinking, closing, they're laying
Yeah.
off reporters. Um, when you look at that, Liz, and your own work in legacy, having come from Vox and other spaces, did you see this now? Of course, looking back, it's always easier to criticize than when we're in the moment of things. But were there inevitable missed opportunities here? Were there things that looking back, you were like, wow, Legacy could have done this differently and they chose not to?
1,000%, 1,000%, and I see
Hmm.
coming from legacy, I grew up in these newsrooms. I care about them. I love the Washington Post. It breaks my heart to
Hmm.
see what's happening there now. But,
Yep.
um, our industry has been traditionally very slow to embrace change.
Yeah.
Journalists are skeptical, companies are risk averse, and there has never, ever been enough focus on what the actual mission is, which is to inform audiences and actually give them the information they need. We have become, as an industry, the journalism industry, too caught up in propping up an existing infrastructure that is just completely hollowed out. And so, yes, there have been missed opportunities. And so, you see, like right now, I call the era that we're in right now the pivot to creator, which kind of
Mm,
follows on the several pivots to video that we've seen. And what that means is that, yes, the industry is realizing that this is a changing space and that people are paying attention to the creator ecosystem in the way that all those Reuters stats you quote it tell us. But when we say pivot to creator, like really what that means is that for many of these media companies and newsrooms, this has become a line on their strategy for the next year. And some will do it well and
mhm.
others will not, right? And so I think that the ones who move into it slowly, I was talking to a news organization yesterday about how to do this. I was like, you need to step slowly and figure out what really works for you. Like, don't announce a big splashy program and jump in with both feet, and then have to walk back from that. So we'll see, right? We'll see. One thing that I don't think that many media companies are ready to do yet is incentivize people who do this type of work to stay. And
Mm.
that's where you've seen people like Dave Jorgensen leave the Washington Post and other creators or people who have built a following in their news organization walk out the door. And if news organizations want them to stay, they need to actually pay them what they're worth.
Yeah. Ooh, amen. And that's for all industries at this point, but in particular, definitely when we're talking about the journalistic landscape, because, I remember thinking about this when I wanted to do this segment with you, and I was trying to just get really existential with myself and why I also am so in this industry when it's not proving to be very lucrative. It proves to be
Yeah.
very challenging on many levels, but there is just such a level of commitment and passion to both storytelling and truth seeking that
Yeah.
I think people don't really understand from the outside in. And one of the things that I felt like really accelerated the downhill, fall and decline of legacy outlets was really when Donald Trump came on the scene and started really shouting from the rooftops this idea of fake news and how
Yes.
you couldn't really trust the people that we had trusted. Really, some of them had been on the airwaves and in print for decades. And this coinciding with the rise of, I would say, the content creator,
Yeah.
which I think has happened a little bit before the independent journalist, and perhaps you could share what the difference is in your mind. But
Yeah.
what do you think that political shift did about a decade ago with this concept around fake news and where people started looking for news?
Yeah. I mean, again, there are several kind of things that happened all at once that created a perfect storm. Donald Trump and kind of the right wing of the Republican Party have absolutely had an incredible impact on shattering the idea that journalism is a public good, and
Mm,
really causing a lot of Americans to question what our motivation is as journalists, right? And to distrust us. However, that's not the only thing, right? I
right.
think for years there are many communities, whether they are united by identity, by sexual orientation, by geography, by socioeconomic level, who have felt disenfranchised or unrepresented by mainstream media. And, there is a prevailing still at most mainstream media outlets outlook and audience that they create content for. And so when you had the creator economy kind of emerge and creator of any stripe, what you started seeing was a diversity of sources, a multiplicity of sources of where people could get their information about the world from. So now, no matter what your identity or who you identify with, chances are you can find a trusted messenger who looks like you, shares your viewpoints, is from your city or town, and so they understand it in a way that maybe a mainstream news outlet does not. And so I think that's also has led to the erosion of trust in mainstream media, but also the rise in trust in the creators. The other thing that I would be remiss if I didn't mention is another reason that the trust is eroded is this continued um, pose by mainstream media that we are impartial. It's part of the ethical commitment that journalists make that they are impartial and there's no both sidesism, that we are all unbiased. And the audiences just know that's not true,
Yeah.
because we all have implicit bias. And that shows through in headline choices and what photos are chosen. And so as journalism organizations continue to cling to that kind of piece of their storytelling about what their role in society is, that will continue to erode trust. On the content creator side, many content creators are very transparent about what their point of view is. And, Adam's making that point in the chat right now. Creators like Basan Auda, who is creating content from Gaza, is very clear about the fact that she's Palestinian, then that's where she's
Mhm.
coming from, and that's what she's sharing. But that transparency about bias is actually seen as more trustworthy than saying you're impartial, but then kind of showing you're not.
I love that. And I so appreciate that because to me, when you were talking about sort of the gatekeepers of these spaces and how a lot of people didn't feel represented by the spaces that they were consuming their news in, and that's why a lot of people started looking other places. I always tell people, don't, because people say, "Oh, I look to you for my news source." Cool. Who else? Because I'm
Right.
giving you my filtered perspective from my lived experience. Of course, I'm always trying to root it in evidence and fact and all of that good stuff, right? Those
Yeah.
ethics of journalism, but it's still coming from me as a white woman who grew up in a certain space and had a certain lived experience. Look at me, but also look at XYZ. And I think that's where we could really create this sort of beautiful tapestry of journalists in these independent spaces is having these creator places where you can go and sort of hit a bunch of different perspectives and ideas at once. And to me, that's what gives an audience an actually really well informed basis for then making up their own minds on something. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit with you around what you did with Project C in
Mhm.
particular for this year, because you were really focused on this idea of the local journalist. And so I was one of them, and Ben was, who's on here, and a bunch of other wonderful people like Monique, who I've also had on my show.
Yep.
And, from all these different walks of life, all these different types of beats. It wasn't just, political or hard news. It was lifestyle, it was arts, all these different things. Can you
Mhm.
talk about why you wanted to focus on local and the impact that the local news diminishing is having in our communities?
Yeah. So local is so incredibly important. It is what impacts us most, right, in our lives is like what
Mhm.
happens in the area where we live to our families, to what rent we're paying, to what taxes that we're paying, to what things there are to do. And the just hollowing out of the journalism industry has meant that in many communities, like they don't even have a local, newspaper anymore or
Mhm.
local coverage. And when they do, like the first things that get cut from the newsrooms are like the people who are doing things to do coverage, the people who are covering City Hall on a daily basis, right? And like many newsrooms that are owned by big newspaper conglomerates are not even like standing up newsrooms in those towns anymore. They have ghost newsrooms where the news is coming from elsewhere and being filtered through. So for us at Project C, it was really important to say we know that there are people in communities like you, Natalie, in Pennsylvania, and Ben in LA, and Monique in Miami, who are like doing the hard work to cover your own communities. And so we wanted to support you and support that work that's happening and make sure that you know that there are other people doing that work that you can be in community with. And that was a big part of launching Project C is being in community, like, especially for journalists, we're used to being in an intellectual community where we can bounce ideas off one another, have editors and, other reporters and copy editors and researchers. And when you do this independently, it is often very isolating
Yeah.
and you don't have that intellectual community anymore. So what we have tried to do with a community like Project C is to like rebuild that intellectual community is just a little bit different, right? So you are in community in Project C with other local journalists. They just happen to be in Los Angeles and Miami and Portland, Oregon, but they are all kind of coming from the same place and trying to serve their community. Similarly, like we also try to support and other types of communities, right? Like we
Mhm.
just completed another cohort of Muslim American creator journalists that we brought together, and we've been working with them for the last 6 months, and we just culminated with a showcase in DC this past weekend. But most of these people didn't know each other before they entered this cohort, and now they do, right? And we have seen in programs like this and just the fact that they're, meeting each other and bumping into each other in communities like Project C, but also in Substack and Beehive and other places, that leads to collaboration,
Mhm.
that leads to, like, stronger content overall.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that that community aspect is so important, especially as we're seeing the digital age with the rise of generative AI also infiltrating our news spaces. And I wanted to touch on that too, because this to me is sort of the next frontier of issues. We're not even through the
Yeah,
issues that we need to be through to continue on to this next frontier, but here we are.
yeah,
And I'm using generative AI specifically because this is the AI where we're seeing deep fakes, where we're seeing, non-journalists, these AI entities posing as news outlets and news sources. So this is what I'm
yeah,
talking about, not the things that can auto correct your spelling or something like that. From
right.
reporting to research to search and audience discovery, I mean, generative AI is really everywhere in this industry. Is there anything that excites you about it, and what genuinely worries you about it?
Oh my gosh, that's such a big question. So yeah, I mean, and this is a frequent topic of conversation in the Project C
Yeah.
community and with independent journalists. Like Taylor Lorenz is actually in the middle of doing some reporting right now that she's been rolling out in her newsletter about AI and how it's impacting
Mhm.
her work. And I think she said something scary, like she's lost 50% of her revenue in the last year.
Oh
Um,
my god.
because AI is scraping her work, and so people are able to get it without paying, for her newsletter. So
Wow.
those are the kinds of things that we need to continue to work with the AI platforms to say, how are you going to protect these people, right? Like, what does
Mhm.
that look like? And I don't know, right? Like, tech platforms aren't known for doing things out of the goodness of their heart. So,
Really?
the future on that one is really unpredictable. There is AI that is being used in multiple use cases by independent creator journalists, and I
Mhm.
think will continue to be because, again, back to the solopreneur thing, there's only so much one person can do. So we're
That's right.
seeing a lot of adoption of it and doing kind of rote tasks like you
Mhm.
know invoicing, that sort of thing on the back end, or go submit like multiple FOIA requests for me, that sort of
Mhm.
thing. Where most of the folks who I talk to draw the line is in the generating content piece.
Mhm.
And I think that we are going to see, and we're already seeing audiences can pick out AI content, AI generated content like a mile away, and they don't like it. I don't like
Mm-mm.
it. Right. And
Mm-mm.
that part of the success of the creator ecosystem and is the kind of parasocial personality based, like wanting to feel a human connection. Right.
Yeah.
And so I do think that that is something that is going to continue to set the work we are all doing apart from AI generated work, even when there's an avatar that's created that looks, feels, seems human, there's something that's like in that uncanny valley that is just off. And so I think that people want us in the same way they want to go outside and experience nature, right? Like we are natural. We are organic journalism.
We are, yes. And I think of all of the things that you gain as an independent journalist, but all the things that you often lose too. And you had mentioned it, that sense of community, which I think things like, Project C and other creator groups can really help fill that void, but also like the legal protections. And we talked about this when we were all together in Chicago during the Online News Association's big event. And you and I talked about this at length as well, because on the one hand, we know that journalists, local journalists, are very important to preserving and protecting our democracy just by calling truth to power, just by the sheer act of reporting on
Yeah,
the people that we need to hold accountable. But we have a very sue happy administration right now, and there
yeah,
have been a lot of lawsuits pointed at really big guys like at CBS News and like other spaces. And so I think a lot of independent journalists are a little nervous, myself included, because we would be kind of like low hanging fruit. So, can you give any advice or support for what we can do to protect ourselves and how community can help rally around local journalists to help protect them?
yes. So first of all, independent journalists are low-hanging fruit, and they have been gone after. If you think about Don Lemon and Georgia Fort
Yep.
in Minnesota, like, that is absolutely they were seen as easier to go after than maybe a large media company, and so we're already seeing it happen. That is a big, difficult, gnarly question about, how do you do accountability journalism, investigative journalism, enterprise journalism without liability coverage? I will tell you, even for media companies, liability insurance, the cost of it doubled when Donald Trump was reelected. So
Wow.
it is more expensive than ever. But I do still think, like, if you are doing that kind of reporting, it is worth going and finding a broker and figuring out if there's a level of insurance coverage that you can get. There are other options. There's Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. There's an entity called Lawyers for Reporters and a couple of other groups that are out there who are willing to do pro bono legal work for us. They can't accept every case, but they are worth reaching out to if you're working on something that you think could make you a target of the government or somebody else who might not be happy with the reporting work you're doing. But again, we are in this great rebuilding phase. And like I said, we're building the plane as we're flying it. And part of it is not just standing up the ability of independent journalists to be able to work by themselves in the creator ecosystem. It is designing and trying to build infrastructure for them. And that's one of the pieces of interest infrastructure that we need to solve for. Another is affordable healthcare, right? Another is a bureau of copy editors, researchers, producers, and others who can help us, right, when we need that support. And trust me, like, they're out there. They've been fired just as much as reporters have, right?
Yep.
So there is a lot of discussion about how can we start connecting these people who need the support. But um, anybody who has any ideas for how to build some of these pieces of infrastructure, like my inbox, I'm Liz at projectc.biz. Don't hesitate to reach out because it's always a conversation that I want to have.
Liz, I could definitely talk to you about this for probably, 5 more hours and we would still be scratching the surface. But
Yeah.
in the interest of respecting your time, I am going to wrap it up. I appreciate everybody that's tuned in. And if you tuned in late, don't worry. I'm going to be posting this shortly on Substack, YouTube, and all the places. Make sure you subscribe above. But I've been trying to get people that I've had on my show because everything's really heavy right now. I want to end in a dream space together and
Hmm.
talk about what are you hopeful for as we look forward at this industry 5 to 10 years from now. What would you like to see happen?
I am actually hopeful because I have seen so much change in the past 2.5 years in the ability for journalists to actually make a living doing this work independently,
Mhm.
and the audience is responding. And I see this spirit of community, of journalists wanting to help each other, and so that gives me a lot of hope for the future. It also gives me a lot of hope that there are audiences out there that want journalism, right? That, as you said earlier, it's not that the audience doesn't want journalism and that young people don't want journalism, is that they're finding it in different places. So I'm very, very thankful for you, for the other folks on this call who are independent journalists who are lighting the way for the future, right? And I think that it's going to change the journalism industry forever, but I think it's a change that was needed.
Liz, you truly do inspire me. I'm so glad I ended up in your orbit. It's such an honor to know
Likewise.
you, and I appreciate you being on my show. If people want to learn more about Project C, where can they go? Oh, I see
So
you got your
yeah,
newsletter
I
right
just
there.
dropped, yeah, apologies. It's actually a Beehive newsletter, but I dropped, if you want to subscribe, it's free once a week. It's dropping tomorrow and it's all the latest news about the creator journalism space.
Can I just say I was actually talking to someone today about your newsletter and how we were both saying it's like a must read if you're in this industry. So thank you
Um,
again for being a part of it. Thank you to everybody that joined. I appreciate all of you so much. And as always, until next time, please take care of yourselves and each other. Thanks, Liz.
bye.